The following presentation is a production of Ride the Wave Media.
We are back. We are those guys. We hope to be your guys, bringing you the latest around the National Football League. And Nick, there are happenings around the National Football League that I will get to shortly. But first, what's going on, my man? How you doing?
Nothing much, man. Just trying to find ways to beat the heat.
It's Denver, Colorado, so I'm guessing 36 hours of heat, and then you'll get snow by the weekend here?
No, if that were to happen, we have a much larger problem called global warming. So hopefully we don't get any snow by the weekend.
Well, that's not really our problem. We both have kids, so they can, just like with everything else, take care of us, as both our planet and our own bodies get older too. It's just a thought, Nick. Just a thought. I was excited to announce that there's actual football. I mean, not really. However, as of this recording, and as you're listening to us, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, we have a team fully reported and ready for camp. Training camp, Nick. Not mini camp, not OTAs. We got ourselves the Houston Texans, one of the favorites in the AFC. Your former Houston Texans are there. Rookies, veterans are all at camp as of Wednesday this week, and they seem to be one of the favorites in the AFC. Looking at a team that overachieved, certainly they had the number 2 pick. They traded up for the number 3 pick as well. Landed both Offensive Rookie of the Year, C.J. Stroud, Defensive Rookie of the Year, Will Anderson. The sky's the limit, right? What do you just zooming out? You look at a roster and a team like the Houston Texans think that you're very close to.
Well, let's take a 30,000-foot view and take a look at the Houston Texans, because for me, they're one of the tougher teams in the NFL. Just look at what they did ahead of schedule. Rookie quarterback, rookie head coach, rookie offensive coordinator. No one could have projected that they would do as well as they did, especially thinking about the negative narratives coming into the draft when C.J. Stroud was coming out. But this kid showed that he is mentally and from a skill standpoint farly advanced than most people had originally thought. And look at the additions they made on both sides of the ball. And for me, we go through this cycle every single offseason, and no one really wins the offseason, but you have to give them a lot of credit for retooling and restocking on both sides of the ball. And C.J. Stroud should be much better in year 2. And dare I say this, man, there's not going to be this thing of sophomore slump. No. It is not going to be like that with this guy, because he's got a bunch of veteran wide receivers around him, and they added Stefon Diggs. So we haven't done a fantasy football show, but forecasting, I already know where I'm going with my fantasy roster, and they added Joe Mixon. Oh, yes. Yeah, they're prime and ready to go.
I realized that first of all, Nick, we're talking about 2 excellent additions on the offensive side of the football for an ascending quarterback. And I'll get into some nuts and bolts. We'll do the offense first because we want to do our fantasy football lean. And I'm sure I could tell you about my Scott Fishbowl draft, which is still going. We started the draft 9 days ago. We're halfway there, but that's for another time when we do Alex before we split. The Houston Texans additions. I personally am more excited about Joe Mixon in that Bobby Slowick offense than I am Stefon Diggs. Or maybe I should say, Nick, I need you to help me break down this Houston Texans offense. Is the addition of Stefon Diggs a shift in personnel grouping, or are we going to see a little bit less of one of those 3 stud receivers between Diggs, Nico Collins, and another rookie sensation last year in Tank Dell? The Houston Texans were bottom 10 in 11 personnel. That's 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 receivers. 60% of the time, they had 3 receivers on the field. And we know from listening to you and many others discussing this offense, they're a team that wants to establish the run and set C.J. Stroud up in play action. Well, 40% of their offensive snaps, you're going to not have one of Nico Collins, Stefon Diggs, or Tank Dell. You got to help me shake this out, Nick. How do they get their skill players on the field? And are we going to see a drop from maybe Tank Dell's the odd man out if Stefon Diggs is the veteran coming in, or
No,
Stefon Diggs is playing a smaller role?
no. Listen. The fact that we've seen more of 11 personnel in the NFL over the past 5 years than we've ever seen,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that trend is only going to grow, especially looking at what they're done, the Houston Texans, that is, from an offensive standpoint. You're going to see 11 personnel, but you're going to see it in different varieties. You're going to see different combination of guys on the field. And this is an excellent problem to have if you are offensive coordinator Bobby Sloak, because each game is going to change as far as who's the featured person. It is going to be difficult on opposing defensive coordinators to say, okay, well, who's going to get the ball this week? We got to shut down Nico Collins. We got to shut down Tank Dell. Then you have Joe Mixon. Then it's Dalton Schultz. It's kind of a pick your poison. This is the best offensive situation you would love being any quarterback. So this is a game where we're going to see C.J. Stroud's numbers probably be better than they were last season. And I know that is crazy to say, but having all these wide receiver combinations, we know, one, guys are going to get hurt, so you have enough depth for that. And then you can spread guys out and create ideal running lanes for a guy like Joe Mixon, because Joe, you can hand it off to him, but guess what? He's a pass catching running back. I'll say this, and you tell me if you like this comp.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like Joe Mixon is what Ezekiel Elliott was in his prime with the Dallas Cowboys, but Joe Mixon is older running back, but he still possessed those same kind of skill set.
I see the fit, and I wonder if he's that type of guy who, like Zeke, never came off the field, right? The similar skill set, running between open lanes. The other receiving we hadn't seen as much, with the Bengals constantly cycling in other pass catching running backs, and that may continue with Zach Moss. But we'll get to previewing the Bengals a little bit later, because I do like me some Zach Moss this year for fantasy purposes. But I am wondering, one, if we're cycling receivers off the field, if Joe Mixon is the type of player that is going to stay on the field for them constantly, right? We had seen a flash 2 years ago from the Florida running back. Oh God, why is his name escaping me all of a sudden? Dameon Pierce, right? And then being phased out of that offense. Devin Singletary stepping up in his absence this past season. Now he's with the Giants. So you've got a rotation of running backs as well as the receiver position, that as many weapons for CJ Stroud. That's what you're supposed to do, taking advantage of that rookie contract that he is under. Again, the offensive line poised to be one of the best. They had Laramie Tunsil in and out of the lineup. They had basically a shuffling of the deck with all the injuries that they had, with Shaq Mason on the right side. And this year they're coming poised in with hopefully a healthy Juice Scruggs, a healthy Kendrick Green, to solidify that interior, to go along with a pair of the best tackles. And I mentioned Tunsil, and on the right side, Nick, this is when we do things on the fly.
Titus Howard.
Thank you. Again, the Texans achieved, not just because they had a rookie quarterback, not just because they had a rookie 5th-round wide receiver opposite Nico Collins, who had his breakout season, but they did this with a bruised, battered, and injured offensive line. Cup is half full because everybody's healthy in the offseason. Even Tank Dell, who's back running routes after he was, a victim of a shooting at a nightclub after recovering from a fractured fibula. Like, he's healthy. Like, this team looks poised to go, but with all of the issues that they may have had coming into last year, being projected as another team looking to pick a top draft, let alone a team that won a playoff game, the sky's the limit, especially for that offense and on that defense. Danielle Hunter comes in with Jonathan Greenard going to Minnesota. So they're adding, for a do-it-all defensive end like Greenard was, who was one of the best run stoppers from the outside edge. Danielle Hunter and linebacker Azeez El-Shahir coming from Tennessee, they're really going after the pass rush. So I think getting after the quarterback for them is going to be a lot of fun to watch, but it puts a lot of pressure on whoever that second corner is opposite Derek Stingley Jr. We've talked about the former top 10 picks they brought in, Jeff Okudah, CJ Henderson. They use a second-round pick on Kamari Lassiter. I think they're really going all in on rushing the quarterback, which is huge in the AFC South in particular. And they need to make sure that the secondary is shored up to boost that.
Well, here's what I'll say. This kind of recipe that, both Slowick and D'Amico Ryans are cooking up, I'm quite familiar with it.
Okay.
All you have to do is look at San Francisco before D'Amico took over as the defensive coordinator for Robert Saleh, who's now the head coach of the New York Jets.
Right. So you were there in San Francisco with D'Amico.
Right.
After you guys played together in Houston.
Yeah. So it's the same philosophy. So you want to build somewhat of, I'll say your offensive line can be average, but you have to have weapons. And just think about Kyle Shanahan's history that dates back to Mike Shanahan's history. There's always been a stable of running backs. Now, you may have your marquee back, but you have 2, 3, maybe a fourth guy who can spell the first guy who has a similar skill set, but he's not as explosive as the first guy. So this is why you have Dameon Pierce, and then you have Joe Mixon in the backfield. And then you have the bevy of wide receivers to make matchups difficult for opposing defenses around the league. But then you look at the defensive side of the ball. You talked about the Houston Texans secondary, which I would say not the best secondary in the league, but not the worst secondary. But pass rush and back end play go hand in hand. And if you got dogs up front that can speed up the clock of the quarterback and force error throws, I don't care who you have in the backfield. Hell, you and I could be playing the corners. We're going to have big plays, but that's how it works. And to me, that is the recipe they're trying to duplicate in Houston.
They went so young in that secondary. Now guys are coming into their own, Jalen Petrie, and they brought in the veteran.
Jimmy Ward is still there.
Jimmy Ward is still there, exactly. So I'm excited to see how things kind of shape up and, how effective they are going after, the Will Levises, Anthony Richardsons of the world, to really ensure that they remain not just dominant on offense, but that defense takes a step up that really solidifies them as one of the true contenders in the AFC. I mean, aside from the Kansas City Chiefs three-peating or your crazy Jets fans that are getting an MVP season from Aaron Rodgers, like the Texans are up there with maybe Baltimore, who they lost to in the divisional round last year, as one of the top 3 or 4 teams coming out of the AFC this year. So, Nick, we're going to do this with every team that we preview. And again, we're dipping our toes in. I don't have all my notes, but I'd like to hold ourselves to this. I don't necessarily need a win-loss record from you because, honestly, what's the exercise? But what's the floor and the ceiling for this team? Is it, as a baseline, they're going to win the division, or just a wild card? And is their ceiling maybe the number 1 seed in the AFC? Where do you sort of, in your range of outcomes, put the Houston Texans' fortunes for this season?
Well, obviously the floor is you're winning the AFC South.
Wow.
They're winning the AFC South, no matter how you slice it, because think about the teams who are in the AFC South for one, right? But also the ceiling is, you know what? It may not be the number 1 seed, but they're going to be in the mix, and they're going to make a lot of noise in the mix. And I'll say this: the Houston Texans are the biggest threat to the Kansas City Chiefs three-peating.
Mm-hmm.
They are. And I know that may seem far-fetched because they lost to Baltimore, a team that lost to Kansas City. But still, you look at the fact that a team like the Houston Texans being ahead of schedule, usually when the team gets a rookie head coach and offensive coordinator quarterback, it takes them at least 4 years to even be in a conversation where they are several games away from the big game. That's where the Texans were this year. There's 2 things that could disrupt that: injuries and being overly confident. Those are 2 things that can hurt the Houston Texans. But the idea is if they play the way that they played last year, desperate and hungry,
Mhm.
and they stay healthy, yes, they are the biggest threat to Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs.
All right. Well, if it's the Kansas City Chiefs that are in threat of going back to the Super Bowl, we'll switch over to the biggest news coming from the NFL this week of the San Francisco 49ers. And in a very unsurprising and very telegraphed move, I'm going to bring up a tweet that came in from February 12th after they lost the Super Bowl. Brandon Aiyuk, it was a screenshot from his Instagram Reels, his story. Don't forget what got you there. Now, fast forward from February all the way now to July. He formally requested a demand to be traded. This coming after the Athletics' Diana Rossini reporting San Francisco wanted to offer him $26 to $27 million a year in a contract extension. Well, we just saw Amon-Ra St. Brown make $30 million, Jalen Waddle, $28 million, and he's decided that that's not going to be enough for him. There's no hometown discount, especially given, much like the Houston Texans, the 49ers can take advantage of a rookie contract for Brock Purdy. So now Nick Ferguson, an organization that you know too well, and many of the players involved that you know too well from both the front office and from the player personnel standpoint, I think historically the 49ers have had the leverage for a number of reasons. Number one, they win games. Players want to play for teams that win games and can get them to Super Bowl appearances, even if they don't, it seems to be elusive for them to win them. Deebo Samuel had previously put in a trade request. They got a contract done in August. George Kittle, Joey Bosa, both previously held out for offseason workouts. They got contracts done. Is this a matter of the timing, or are we going to see Brandon Aiyuk play out the fifth-year option, and he may end up somewhere in free agency this time a year from now?
I think it's more likely that Brandon Aiyuk will play out that 50 option and then end up playing somewhere else. And here's some things that I think everyone should think about, because Brandon Aiyuk has a point. You mentioned a bevy of players currently on the 49ers roster who use, I guess, negotiating tactics, and they eventually got paid.
Right.
Now, the problem for the San Francisco 49ers is, which is a good thing, it's a bad thing at the same time. You mentioned Aiyuk is up. We're talking about Bosa, Kittle, and Deebo Samuel. And not to mention that at some point, the realization of paying Brock Purdy, they're going to have to deal with. But they have so much money invested in so many players that someone's going to have to go. It's inevitable. And why do you think Pearsall was actually drafted? Because
right.
The 49ers realized that we've had issues with Deebo Samuel before. And then they knew they were going to have a Brandon Aiyuk issue. But to Brandon Ayuk's point, he's watching all these other wide receivers who are getting a certain type of money. And he's like, no, $26 million. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of money, but not in comparison to my contemporaries. But also think about this. Brandon Aiyuk plays for the San Francisco 49ers, where taxes are high as hell. Right? So think about it. $26 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you throw in the taxes, how much is he really making?
Sure.
Right? So it's like either you guys are going to pay me what I feel as though I'm worth according to the guys who made money before me, or you're just going to let me go. But here's what I do know. There is still value in Brandon Aiyuk. So either San Francisco ponies up and pay him the money, or he's going to get it somewhere else.
Now, it's I don't want to say it's a chicken or egg situation, but we understand that Kyle Shanahan's strength as an offensive play caller has been able to shuffle out pieces even at quarterback, but also all over the field. Is Brandon Aiyuk the type of exception? They went all in on Christian McCaffrey. They haven't given him a new contract. I mean, the Panthers did, but is he at that level of a McCaffrey or a Trent Williams or George Kittle, where their offense is that much better with Brandon Aiyuk on the field that they need to make a financial investment in him? I know for sure that on plays where the pocket breaks down or Brock Purdy needs to buy time, Brandon Aiyuk was the number one receiver. I mean, based on metrics provided by Matt Harmon, who gives us the great reception perception, find his work over at Yahoo. Again, one of my favorite voices, fantasy football. He was in the the upper echelon, the top 10%, 90th percentile plus success rate versus man, zone, and press coverage. You asked Brandon Aiyuk to get open, and he did, and he was hugely influential in the pass game when maybe the Shanahan play or the first couple of reads broke down for Purdy in the pocket. So I'm just trying to figure out, it's not a pecking order, but I feel based on the last 2 years worth of production and the underlying numbers that Ayuk should be in that same tier of what McCaffrey, Trent Williams, and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle bring to this offense.
It's without a doubt that Brandon Aiyuk is a very valuable cog in the wheel for the 49ers offense, right? So essentially, they've created this monster, and it happens around the league all the time. And you're absolutely right. I mean, you actually answered your own questions, posting all the information about Brandon Aiyuk's production. And you go back to the game against the Detroit Lions where the 49ers were down at home. I mean, Brandon Aiyuk makes some very key plays to get them and dig them out of the hole. And he did it by either catching passes or he did it by blocking.
Yeah.
And when you play in a Shanahan offense, you have to be as committed to blocking as anyone else as a wide receiver, because Christian McCaffrey's father, my former teammate, and McCaffrey, that's the one thing both he and Rod Smith did well. You cannot run the ball with Christian McCaffrey, whether you run it with him or throw it to him, without wide receivers blocking on the outside. And that is something both Deebo Samuels did well, George Kittle did well, and Brandon Aiyuk did it exceptionally well. So once again, the 49ers find themselves somewhat at an impasse. Either you give him the money and you disrupt what you currently have, or you let him walk. Now, let me throw this in as one particular option. We've seen Brett Veach out in Kansas City get deals done, right?
Yeah.
In the 25th hour, when they only had like $75 in the cap, right? Somehow everyone gets paid. But once again, can you get players on the same stage as saying, look, we have something good here. We got to keep our core guys together, but we also have to make sure financially we take care of them. So in order to pay Aiyuk, they may have to say, well, Kittle, we may have to take some back end of your money, transfer to a signing bonus, right? And we say, well, we're just going to extend your contract out, which we're going to have to pay later on. I mean, there's no luxury tax in football, but still at the same time, we're going to kick that can down the street.
Yeah.
We're going to take advantage of the window that is open now. I mean, hopefully Kyle and John, my former teammate, John Lynch, that is, they're thinking that way, because you don't want to break up the team. Now, Kyle, being a very smart guy he is, could say, you know what? We knew we were going to lose one or two players. And we're okay losing those guys, because Pearsall out of Florida, that kid can go. But we haven't seen him work on the NFL level yet.
As you were explaining how they negotiate and navigate their cap, what I had to do was Google what the New Orleans Saints dead cap is right now.
Yeah.
Because they're the poster child, right? Mickey Loomis and that front office will pay guys and kick that can down the road, and we'll take a smaller cap hit now so we can add more players. And they owe $41.5 million for 7 other guys to be playing for different teams, or in Michael Thomas's case, to be a free agent. So your Denver Broncos are doing the same with Russell Wilson, about $40 million for him to play elsewhere. But it's just the part of the business that when you're the Saints or the Broncos, and the expectation isn't not only, just show up to the playoffs, Super Bowl, oh my God. But for the 49ers, that fan base has been starved for a Super Bowl. So it's a much more incredible tightrope act than a lot of other teams that have the ability to kick the can down the road and just be happy that they go 8-9 with Derek Carr or Bo Nix at the helm. And I know 8-9 is a little lofty for your Denver Broncos, but it would be for my Patriots as well. So I'm not trying to throw any shade. I swear. Nick, before we split, I think more so on my timeline than I've ever seen, everyone that I know, whether they're in their, late 20s and their 30s like me and their 40s like you, everyone is just enamored with playing the first NCAA college football game in about a decade, with the
Mhm.
latest college football 25 coming out. Um, many years ago, maybe even as many as during COVID. I think one of my favorite things in all of video games, if it was Madden, if it was FIFA, if it was NBA 2K, was building an organization, building a franchise, and going through the years and setting things off and establishing long traditions of success. Something that I was used to with the Patriots and the Celtics in real life, but we'd have fun and do it with the then San Diego Chargers, who never had that type of relationship with winning. So,
Mhm.
Nick, before we split, are you among the people enamored with college football 25? If you are, who are you using? If you aren't, um, is there something appealing? Maybe you take over your Yellow Jackets, or you do something, you become better than Dion with the Buffs. I mean, what would your vision be uh, in a simulation where you get to run a college football program? And this could be something we kick out, to our guy Blaine right here when he does game related. I don't think they've tackled, sports games to this point, but there's no reason that they can't, Nick.
Well, for me, I am not big into the football video games. I'm usually a spectator.
Hmm.
But my son has, was it Madden 2024, 2023?
Yeah,
And he's beaten me, right?
sure.
Which was his, I guess, his rite of passage, and he bragged and all of that. So
Just take him out to the driveway and hoop. See how that goes.
so I don't play the games in that way. But if I were to play, I would say I would have to play with maybe, I don't know, Texas, right?
Really?
Texas would probably be that team I would have to play with because Steve Sarkisian, man, they just keep loading up with players. And I don't know the nuances of the new game because they always add these hidden things that you can do, maybe crowd noise or whatever. I don't know, but that would be the team I would pick because my first impulse would be Michigan, but there's no Harbaugh in Michigan anymore,
Okay.
right? And they don't have some of the same players anymore. Blake Corum is not there anymore, right? So I'm going to go with Texas if I were to play the game. And my co-host on a radio station here in Denver that I fill in with, he's got an advanced copy of it, and he's played the game. And his whole thing is like he played someone. He had Army playing against Eastern Carolina.
Yeah.
He ran the ball the entire time. He
Triple
passed,
option.
yes, he passed the ball one time and he had more than 325 yards of total offense. I told him I couldn't play him. It would drive me crazy that you're running the ball every single play and you're picking up yardage. So I can't wait till the game come out. I'll probably get it to watch my son play. But I myself, I wouldn't play. But if I did, I would choose Texas.
Paul Johnson right now just livid that one of his former Yellow Jackets just absolutely spitting all over the triple
No,
option that
man,
put your team on the
that's
map,
crazy.
ACC champions,
No,
throwing the football 150 times for the entire season.
no, man, no. I want to see a balanced attack. Make even though it's a video game, make it somewhat real to me. I don't want to see you run the ball every single play, man. That's boring as hell.
Well, I can imagine that it's going to be an inflection point and maybe just a way that you try to figure out how to steer your son away from Army or any other program that wants to implement that offense. I know you didn't ask, but me, I want to take any lower tier football program and I want to build them up. Of course, I am regionally biased. Give me Boston College, the team that I fell in love with watching Matt Ryan, or give me UMass Amherst, where I partied at the zoo when I was 18, 19 years old. That's the whole point. It's the nostalgia factor, Nick, because this is a game that hasn't been out for more than a decade, and you have people my age, your age, that are picking up the sticks for the first time in about that long. hopping online and kids like your son just absolutely tooling them online. That's just a little age gap that, it's just something that sort of escapes us in our old age. Again, you're not really showing your old age, Nick, except for when you do talk about getting beat on the sticks by your son. But that's okay, right? There are other ways that we excel, and there are other ways that you can find us at @NickFerguson_25 on all social platforms. And anything you have about your team entering training camp this week, next week, we're going to keep going. Maybe spend some time on just about every team. Will we get to all 32? Maybe, maybe not. How do we get to your team first? You just let us know. I'm Alex Hardy. He's Nick Ferguson. Let's get on out of here. What do you have to say to the people, Nick?
You're not always as old as the calendar may presume that you are. As long as you have old or younger type of thoughts, you're still in the game. So don't let people throw that, you're old type of melody on you. No, you are not.
That's a good plug for College Football 25 in the game. EA Sports, it's in the game. Peace.